I called her my wife as a joke, a throwaway line to a stranger at a secondhand furniture store. The kind of thing you say without thinking, laugh about for half a second, and forget. Except she didn't laugh. She went completely still. Her face turned a color I had never seen on her before, deep and real and startled, like someone had said out loud the one thing she had been quietly hoping to never hear unless it was true. And then, when the store owner walked away, Mara Bennett turned her face from me and whispered 4 words so quietly I almost didn't catch them. I wish that wasn't a joke. I froze. My hand was still on the cart handle. The warehouse hummed around us, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the distant sound of someone dragging a chair across concrete. And I stood there holding onto a cart full of furniture we had just picked out together. 6 years of friendship rearranging itself in my chest like furniture in a room that had been measured wrong from the start. I didn't say anything. That was my first mistake. It would not be my last. But let me take you back to where this actually began, because that moment at the checkout counter didn't come from nowhere. It came from 6 years of something I had been too comfortable to name, too careful to touch, and too slow to understand before it almost walked out of my life for good. My name is Ethan. I'm 28 years old, and I spend most of my days with a drill in one hand and a level in the other. I work for a small renovation crew in Portland. Nothing glamorous. I hang cabinets, patch drywall, haul heavy dressers up narrow staircases while clients stand at the bottom arguing about whether the paint swatch is warm beige or sand beige. It pays the bills, keeps my hands busy, and gives me enough quiet hours inside other people's houses to think too much. Thinking too much is something I have always been good at. Acting on what I think is a different skill entirely, one I apparently needed 6 years and one near disaster to develop. Mara Bennett came into my life the way most important things do. Not with any kind of dramatic entrance, but quietly, sideways, in the middle of a Tuesday that had nothing special about it. We met at a mutual friend's birthday gathering, the kind where nobody really knows each other and everyone stands near the food table pretending to check their phones. She was standing next to the guacamole looking deeply unimpressed with the music choice, and I walked over because I agreed with her expression, and somehow we talked for 3 hours straight, not about anything important, about everything which turned out to be the same thing. By the end of the night I knew she organized corporate events for a living, hated overhead lighting, could not walk past a secondhand bookstore without going inside, and had very specific opinions about which types of people were allowed to use speakerphone in public. I told her I fixed other people's houses for a living, and that my apartment probably looked like a disaster zone to someone with her taste. She said she'd reserve judgment. She never really did reserve it. That was 6 years ago. Since then, Mara had become the person I called when something funny happened and when something didn't. The person whose number I dialed before I'd even finished thinking about why I was calling. She was sharp as a fresh blade, could walk into an empty room with 3 lamps and a bad attitude and make it feel like somewhere you'd want to stay. People who didn't know us always assumed we were together. We always corrected them the same way. No, I'd say, smiling, just friends. She'd roll her eyes and add, if I were dating Ethan, I'd have reorganized his entire closet by now. It was a comfortable line. We'd said it so many times it stopped feeling like a deflection and started feeling like the truth. The kind of thing you say so often you stop examining whether it still fits. Then Mara found a new apartment. 3rd floor unit in an old building near the river. White walls, big windows, hardwood floors scratched in the way that told you the place had history. The kind of space that needed love but had good bones. She called me the day after she signed the lease. No hello, just, Ethan, I need you to come furniture shopping with me. I asked why. You have taste, she said. I have a truck. Exactly, she answered. And you know when a table is about to collapse just by looking at it. I pretended to be offended. I told her I thought she was calling because she missed me. There was a short pause on the other end of the line. Her voice softened just slightly, enough that I noticed, not enough that I knew what to do with it. I do, she said. But the truck helps. Sunday morning I picked her up in my old pickup, and we drove to a big second-hand furniture warehouse on the edge of town. Mara moved through the aisles like she was conducting an orchestra. A tall floor lamp with a moss-green shade, A solid oak coffee table with honest scratches, two mismatched dining chairs, a small cabinet with slightly tarnished brass pulls, a tall bookshelf she declared had soul. I followed behind, pushing the cart, trying not to grunt when we lifted things, and listening to her reasoning on each piece with the focus of someone presenting architectural plans. When she pointed at a bright yellow armchair, I frowned. "That chair's wobbly." She turned instantly defensive. "You only hate it because it's yellow." "I hate it because the legs sound like they're confessing to a crime every time someone sits down." She laughed, loud and sudden, and for a second the whole warehouse felt warmer. That laugh, I had heard it 1,000 times, and somehow it still did something to the air in whatever room we were in. We reached the checkout counter with a cart that barely fit through the aisle. The store owner, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and reading glasses on a beaded chain, looked at the two of us and smiled in the way that people do when they think they already understand the story. "Your wife has excellent taste," she said to me. I didn't think. I didn't pause. I just answered the way you answer a stranger who's made an easy assumption about your life. "Yeah," I said, grinning. "My wife always wins the arguments about furniture." The woman chuckled. I chuckled too. And then I glanced at Mara to share the moment. She wasn't sharing it. She was standing very still. Her face had gone a deep, real red that had nothing to do with the warmth of the store. She was looking down at the receipt like it contained information she urgently needed to study. And when the owner walked off to get change, Mara spoke so quietly I almost missed it entirely. I wish that wasn't a joke. 4 words, barely above a breath. And then she picked up the nearest bag and busied herself with it. And when I opened my mouth to say something, I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing at all. We loaded everything into the truck in near silence, the kind of silence that has a shape to it, that sits in the space between two people and hums at a frequency only they can feel. On the drive back, I tried to keep it light. "Hey," I said, glancing over. "My wife's been awfully quiet today." She didn't look at me. Her voice came out low and flat, and carrying an edge I had never heard from her before. "Don't call me that if you're only joking." My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The air inside the cab changed in an instant, the way air changes before a storm, that particular stillness where everything is still present but nothing is the same temperature anymore. "Mara?" I started. "I know," she cut in. "I know you were just joking." She said it the way people say things they are trying to make true by repeating them. We got to her building and carried everything up 3 flights of stairs without talking about it. The afternoon became about assembly, about drilling and leveling and figuring out which piece of hardware went where. I hung the bookshelf. She stood back, arms crossed, and announced it was crooked. "It's not crooked, Ethan. I organize events for extremely particular wealthy people. I know when something is crooked. I checked it with the level I carried in my back pocket out of habit." The bubble was off-center. She gave me the small, satisfied smirk she produces when she's right about something and knows I know it. "Don't say it," I warned her. She shrugged. "I didn't say anything. Your face is holding a press conference." That made her laugh again, and for a little while the strange new weight between us faded into the background of hammers and laughter and the smell of sawdust and new wood. By evening, the apartment had its shape. The moss-green lamp glowed in the corner. The oak coffee table sat in the center of the room. The bookshelf stood straight against the wall. A rug softened the floor. It looked like her. Warm, a little messy, full of personality, and prettier than she ever gave herself credit for. We sat on the floor eating pizza from the box because the chairs were still dusty. Mara looked around the room slowly, taking it in. Then, very quietly, she said, "Thank you." I asked if she meant for the truck. She kept looking at the room. Her voice dropped even lower. "For being here." Small words, heavy landing. I wanted to ask what she really meant by, "I wish that wasn't a joke." I wanted to ask if she felt the same thing I was starting to feel, the tight-chested thing I had been calling friendship for 6 years because that label was safer and simpler and required nothing of me. But before I could sort any of that into words, my phone buzzed. Crew chief texting about an early start Monday. The moment slipped through my fingers like water. I drove home with the windows down, city lights blurring past, a strange weight settled low in my stomach. Like I had just walked past an open door without seeing it, and now, for the first time, I wasn't sure I'd ever get another chance to walk back through. The next 3 days were quiet in a way that felt wrong. Mara had always filled my phone with things: a photo of a strange plant she spotted on her walk to work, a meme about apartments with bad lighting, a message at 2 in the morning asking if she should get cream or gray curtains. Sometimes she'd text just to scold me for owning one blanket, like that was a violation of some basic human standard. But after the furniture trip, her replies shrank to almost nothing. I messaged her Monday afternoon. Did the moss green lamp survive the night? 4 hours passed. Still alive, she wrote back. Tuesday, I tried again. Has the bookshelf crushed you yet? She replied with one word. No. No period, no follow-up, nothing that sounded like Mara. I sat in my truck during lunch break, grease still on my fingers, staring at the screen. I kept replaying that moment at the counter, the flush in her cheeks, the way she'd whispered those 4 words, the flat edge in her voice on the drive home. Don't call me that if you're only joking. I had meant it as nothing, a harmless reflex to a stranger's assumption, but to her, it hadn't been nothing at all. To her, it had touched something she had been carrying quietly for a long time, and I had brushed against it like it was irrelevant, and then laughed. And that laugh, I was starting to understand, had been the thing that actually hurt. By Friday, the guilt had settled into something heavier. I didn't know how to say what I was beginning to realize, partly because I wasn't sure yet what I was realizing, and partly because I had always been better at fixing physical things than emotional ones. So I did the only thing I knew how to do when words felt too dangerous. I showed up with food. Mara loved the creamy mushroom pasta from a small Italian place near the market. I bought 2 portions, added garlic bread, and picked up a bottle of the peach iced tea she always drank when she was tired. I told myself I wasn't going over there to confess anything. I was just going to apologize for making her feel like a joke and, maybe, if I could find the nerve, tell her that calling her my wife had felt strangely easy, too easy, like something my brain had already decided without asking my permission first. I stood outside her apartment door with the paper bag in my hands and knocked twice. She opened the door in a loose sweater and her hair in a messy bun, eyes going slightly wide when she saw me. Ethan. I lifted the bag. Brought pasta. Your favorite. Before she could answer, a man's voice came from somewhere behind her. Mara, who is it? I looked past her shoulder. A man was standing up from the couch, mid-30s, clean white button-down shirt, expensive watch catching the light from the lamp we had hung together just days before. The kind of man who had clearly never hauled a bookshelf up 3 flights of stairs in his life. He looked at me the way someone looks at a delivery driver who has arrived at an inconvenient time. Mara turned back to me, her voice slightly too bright. This is Julian Pierce, she said. My new boyfriend. The bag in my hand suddenly weighed twice what it had a moment ago. New boyfriend, I repeated, because my brain needed an extra second. She didn't quite meet my eyes. Julian walked over with the smooth, polished smile of someone accustomed to being immediately liked. He looked me over in one sweep. My work shirt had sawdust on it. My boots were scuffed. I was holding a cheap paper bag of takeout while he stood in her living room in a shirt that probably cost more than my week's wages. He extended his hand anyway. Ethan, right? Mara mentioned you helped her set up the place. I shook it. His grip was brief and deliberate. Yeah, I said. That's me. Julian glanced at the bag and said it was thoughtful of me to bring dinner, but that he was actually taking Mara out tonight. I set the bag on the small table by the door and kept my voice even. I told him no problem, that it would keep until tomorrow. I should have left then. I nearly did. But Julian looked around the apartment. At the moss green lamp and the oak table and the bookshelf, I had spent an hour making perfectly level, and he said something that stopped me cold. This place is cute, he said, tilting his head with the expression of someone complimenting a child's drawing. But Mara really deserves somewhere better than this. Mara's brows pulled together just slightly. Julian softened his tone and turned to her. I just mean you deserve a safer neighborhood, a nicer building. I know someone in real estate who has a townhouse in West Hills. Great price, good terms. If you're open to it, I could help with the paperwork. He said it warmly, generously, like a man who wanted only good things for her, and I saw the way Mara's eyes moved across the room she had chosen, the pieces she had picked for reasons, the space we had built together in an afternoon, and I watched Julian's words make it all look small, without him raising his voice once. I kept my tone calm. What's the contract situation? Whose name would it be under? What's the interest rate? Is the deposit refundable? Julian's smile tightened just a fraction. You in real estate too? No, I said. I fix houses. I know enough to be careful when someone drops great price through a friend into a first conversation. Mara's voice cut in sharp. Ethan, you don't have to do that. I looked at her. I was just making sure you're being careful. Or, she said, and her eyes were suddenly colder than I had ever seen them directed at me, you just don't like that I have a new boyfriend. The words hit harder than they should have. Because they weren't entirely wrong, Julian placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle and possessive. It's okay, he said, loud enough to be sure I heard it. Some friends have a hard time when things change. I looked at his hand on her shoulder. She didn't move it away. I stepped back. I just came to drop off the food. Mara glanced at the bag and then at me. 2 words. Thank you. Polite, distant. Like I was a stranger. I turned and walked out. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click. I stood in the hallway for a moment, then walked down the stairs and got into my truck and sat there with the engine off, staring at nothing. For 6 years I had been the person she called. Now there was someone else in her apartment, someone polished and confident who was already trying to convince her that the home we had built together wasn't good enough. And I had no right to feel what I was feeling, because I was the one who had spent 6 years laughing off every assumption that we were more. I was the one who had made the joke and then walked it back like it was nothing. Now there was someone who wasn't walking anything back at all. I started the truck and drove away, but the image of Julian's hand on her shoulder stayed with me the entire way home. I tried to stay out of it for 2 days. Mara was an adult. She could make her own choices. That's what I kept telling myself every time I picked up my phone and stopped. But something about Julian's pitch wouldn't leave me alone. Great price through a friend. I'll help with the paperwork. I had been in enough houses over the years, talked to enough people in and around real estate, to know that combination of phrases often came attached to something slippery. Saturday morning, I called Owen, an old contact who sold building materials and knew most of the real estate crowd in Portland. I asked if he'd heard of a Julian Pierce. Owen let out a long, low whistle. Tell me you're not thinking of doing business with that man, he said. I spent the next 10 minutes learning exactly why my instincts had fired. Julian had been running variations of the same scheme for a couple of years under rotating company names. His latest was called JP Urban Homes. He targeted women who were new to the city, recently starting over, recently alone. He'd appear charming, mention insider deals on townhouses or condos, offer to fast-track paperwork through a trusted financing contact, and request a substantial deposit to hold the unit. Many of the properties weren't his to sell. Some were already under contract. Some didn't exist at all outside old listing photos pulled from the internet. The consulting fee was non-refundable. One woman had lost nearly $18,000 before she understood what had happened. Owen sent me photos of old business cards, screenshots from real estate community warning posts, and a PDF of the complaint from the woman who got burned. I needed more than that, something she couldn't dismiss as jealousy. Sunday afternoon, I drove to the West Hills address Julian had mentioned and found the unit. Big for sale sign from one of the largest legitimate brokerages in the city. No mention of private financing. No mention of Julian Pierce. I called the number on the sign, pretended to be a buyer. The agent who answered, a woman named Patricia, told me the property had 2 scheduled viewings that weekend and had never been part of any private financing program. When I dropped Julian's name casually into the conversation, she went quiet for just a second before asking, "He's circling again?" We met at a coffee shop near the development 20 minutes later. She showed me an email chain from another woman Julian had approached the previous year. Same pitch, same fake urgency, same request for a large good faith deposit that disappeared into a shell company she hadn't been able to trace. She hadn't pressed charges successfully because the contracts were written to look like investment connection fees rather than real estate agreements. But she had been quietly warning other agents ever since. I asked her one direct question. "If my friend is being targeted right now, would you confirm it to her face?" Patricia looked at me for a long moment. "Has she given him money yet?" "Not that I know of." "Then you need to move fast." That night I texted Mara. "I need to talk to you about Julian. It's important." She didn't answer for nearly an hour. When she finally did, her message was short and cold. "Ethan, I don't want to hear you badmouth him." I typed back. "I have proof." She didn't reply after that. I drove to her apartment anyway. A little after 9. The living room lights were on. I knocked and waited. Julian opened the door. The friendly mask he'd worn the first time vanished the second he saw my face. "Not really a good time," he said, his voice flat. I looked past him. Mara was sitting at the dining table with a stack of papers in front of her. On the top page, I could read the logo clearly, Pierce Home Access Consulting. I stepped forward. "Mara." She looked up, clearly irritated. "Ethan, you can't keep doing this. I kept my eyes on her. Did you sign anything yet?" Julian's voice turned sharp. "You need to leave." "Mara, have you transferred any money?" She stood up. "That is none of your business." "I know," I said. "But if you haven't, you need to stop right now." I pulled out my phone. I opened the photo of Julian's old business card and held it up so she could see. "JP Urban Homes." Sound familiar? Julian's expression shifted. I swiped to the complaint document. Rebecca Lane, $18,000. The property wasn't his to sell. His voice came out fast and smooth. That was a civil matter already resolved. I hit play on the recording I'd made of my conversation with Patricia. Her voice filled the apartment, clear and steady, confirming that the West Hills property had never been connected to any private financing program run by Julian Pierce, and that she had watched him use the same approach on multiple women who were new to the city and starting over. Mara went pale. Julian turned to her immediately, hands raised, his voice still careful and reasonable. "Mara, real estate has layers of paperwork. He's taking pieces of information completely out of context." I placed the printed documents on the table. "Then call Patricia right now. Use the number on the actual for sale sign, not the one he gave you." The room went completely still. Mara looked at Julian, then at the papers, then at Julian again. "Do it," she said quietly. Julian didn't move. That was all the answer she needed. She took one step back from the table. Julian looked at her, and then at me, and the careful polish finally cracked. "You're really going to believe some handyman over the guy who's actually trying to get you out of this dump?" Mara stared at him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "What did you just call him?" she asked. Very slowly. Julian realized his mistake. "Mara, I didn't mean to imply." "Yes, you did," she said, cutting him off with a quietness that was somehow louder than raised voices. "You did." She picked up the contract from the table, held it in both hands, and tore it straight down the middle. The pieces fell onto the floor between them. Then she pointed at the door. "Get out of my house." Julian's jaw worked. He looked at me one last time, the contempt sitting openly on his face now. "You think you won?" I met his eyes. "No," I said. "I think she didn't lose." Mara held the door. Julian grabbed his jacket and walked out. The door closed behind him with a sound that felt final, in a way the first time I'd heard it close had not. The apartment was suddenly very quiet. Mara stood in the middle of the room, looking at the torn pieces of paper on the floor. The moss-green lamp glowed in the corner. I stood still. After a long moment, she bent down and gathered every scrap, walked to the trash, and dropped them in. Then she put both hands on the edge of the table and let out a long, shaking breath. "I almost gave him money," she said. "I didn't move. But you didn't." A small, bitter sound escaped her that wasn't quite a laugh. "I almost did. Because he looked me in the face and told me I deserved better than this place." I looked around the apartment. Everything in it had been chosen by her. All of it had been touched by both of us. None of it had ever felt like settling to me. He wasn't selling you a house, I said. He was selling you the idea that your life right now isn't good enough yet. Mara kept her eyes on the table. Her voice dropped lower. And I bought it so fast, I answered before I could think about it. Because he hit the exact place where you're already hurting. She lifted her head and looked straight at me. Do you know where I'm hurting, Ethan? I didn't answer. I couldn't. She pushed off the table and took a few slow steps toward me. I hurt because that day in the furniture store, when you called me your wife, I felt happy. Stupidly, ridiculously happy. And then you turned around and made it into a joke. Like it was the funniest thing in the world. She stopped. Then Julian showed up and said all the right things at exactly the right moment. He made me feel chosen. Not confusing, not like someone you call wife and then immediately laugh about. I stood there feeling like exactly the kind of idiot I was. Her eyes were bright now, but she kept going. Julian wasn't the first person to make me feel small about this place. I did that to myself the second you walked it back like it meant nothing. I told myself I was stupid for reading into it. And then someone came along and confirmed that I was right to want more, so I almost believed him. I took a breath. I'm sorry. She looked at me. For what exactly? For using a joke to touch something real and then getting scared when you reacted like it mattered. Mara didn't move. I kept talking because if I stopped, I might never say it. That day at the store, I didn't say my wife because it was funny. I said it because it felt easy. Too easy. The kind of easy that scared me, so I laughed it off. I told myself we were just friends, the way I've been telling everyone for 6 years. But the truth is, I've been lying to myself longer than that. She took a small step forward. I don't want to be the person you only call when something needs hanging or when you can't sleep. I don't want to hold the spare key and stand on the outside of your life pretending that's enough. I dropped my voice. I want to be the person you call when the apartment breaks and when nothing is broken at all. I want to eat cold pasta on the floor with you and argue about lampshades and carry furniture up 3 flights of stairs and still get yelled at when I hang something crooked. I want to be able to call you my wife one day without having to immediately say it was a joke. Mara's eyes were full now. One tear moved down her cheek and she let it. You're really slow, Ethan. I nodded. I know. She let out a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. Slow enough that I nearly bought a house from a scam artist. That is a special kind of slow. I admitted it. I'm embarrassed for both of us. A small, wet smile appeared. She stepped closer until there was almost nothing left between us. Then she rested her forehead against my chest, right over where my heart was doing something louder than usual. I still hate that you were right about him, she murmured into my shirt. I lifted my arms slowly and held her. Not tight, just enough. I hate that I was right too. We stayed like that for a long minute. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the lamp and the low sound of traffic somewhere below us. After a while, she spoke without moving. Is the pasta still good? I smiled against her hair. Probably cold. I'm hungry. I can heat it up. She pulled back just enough to look at me, eyes still a little red but clearer. And you are not fixing anything else tonight. I glanced toward the curtains where the rod was definitely still a half-inch off from where I'd hung it last week. Unfortunately, I already noticed the curtain rod is slightly… Ethan! I raised both hands. Okay. No fixing. I swear, she laughed. A real one, small but genuine, and leaned back against my chest. For the first time since the furniture store, the air between us didn't feel like it was made of things we were both too scared to say. Mara filed a report the next morning. Patricia sent over everything she had documented. Owen added what he knew from the local real estate community. 2 other women who had been quietly burned by Julian came forward once they heard what happened. He didn't disappear overnight, but the net around him started pulling tight. For the first time, the exits he usually relied on were being watched. Mara didn't cry much after that. She went quiet for a while instead. The specific quiet of someone who has been deceived smoothly and is now reviewing every recent decision with new suspicion. She kept saying she felt stupid. I kept telling her she wasn't. She was tired and lonely, and he knew which combination of words hit which specific wound. She didn't believe me at first, so I stayed. Not with speeches or gestures, just present. I replaced the lock on her front door with something sturdier, installed a small camera at the entrance, went through her lease line by line to make sure it was solid. On the nights she didn't want to cook, I brought food and sat on the floor with her while she picked at it. When she was too ashamed to talk, I sat in the silence with her until she was ready to. About 10 days later, she looked at me from across the coffee table and asked if I thought she was stupid. I answered without hesitating, "No." She narrowed her eyes. "You answered too fast." "Because it's an easy question." She stared at me for a second, then grabbed the nearest pillow and threw it directly at my face. That was the first good sign. We never had an official conversation about what we were becoming. It just started happening, the way all real things do, gradually, and then all at once. I stayed for dinner more often. She started keeping one of my hoodies in her closet without asking. I got my own mug in her kitchen. World's okayest handyman in sarcastic lettering she found somewhere. She changed my name in her phone from Ethan Fix Stuff to Ethan Do Not Hang Curtains without asking. I complained that it was too long. She said it was legally binding, and maybe it was. A month later, we went back to the same second-hand furniture store. She needed 2 more dining chairs. On the drive there, I told her I promised I wouldn't say anything stupid this time. She said she was recording that for evidence. The same woman was behind the counter. When she saw us come in together, she smiled wide and warm. "Well, look who's back. The green lamp couple." Mara turned to me immediately, one eyebrow lifted, waiting to see exactly what I would do with that. My heart beat a little harder. The last time I'd stood in this store, I'd used the word wife like a comfortable shield to deflect a stranger's assumption. This time, I didn't want to deflect anything. I looked at the owner and I said, calmly and clearly, "Not yet." Mara went very still beside me. I reached over and took her hand. "But I'm working on earning the right to say it without making her mad." The owner laughed, warm and loud. Mara's cheeks went pink, but she didn't look away. She squeezed my hand under the bright store lights. And that, I think, was the moment we both stopped pretending we were standing on opposite sides of a door. We bought 2 solid wooden chairs, one with a scratch, one with a loose leg. I carried them up the stairs while she held the door. Back in the apartment, I got my tools and started fixing the wobbly leg while she sat on the floor eating cookies and supervising with the precision of a woman who organizes events for particular people and expects the same standard from her furniture repairs. I tightened the last screw and tested the chair. Solid. She watched me with that small, knowing smile she gets when she's about to say something that will make me roll my eyes. "You always say that," she told me. "You think everything broken can be fixed." I looked up at her. "Not everything, but the things worth keeping? Yeah. Those are worth trying for." She didn't answer right away. She set the cookie down, stood up, walked over, and kissed me. Soft and slow, tasting like chocolate and the quiet kind of certainty that had taken us way too long to find. When she pulled back, she stayed close, her forehead resting against mine. "Until you get a ring," she whispered. I smiled. Noted. Technical specifications received. She laughed, the sound filling the apartment the way the lamp filled the corner, with something warm and specific that belonged only there. I looked around at the space we had built. The slightly crooked bookshelf, the moss-green lamp, the mismatched chairs, the rug we had argued about for 20 minutes in a warehouse aisle while a stranger decided she already knew our story. Julian had once stood in this room and called it not good enough. But standing here with Mara's hands in mine and the evening light coming through the windows, I knew what it actually was. This wasn't a temporary apartment. This was the place where we had almost lost each other and then, finally, told the truth. This was where a badly timed joke, a scam artist, and 6 years of comfortable pretending had all collided and somehow turned into something real and durable and worth keeping. Some love stories start clean, with the right timing and the right words said at the right moment. Ours started with me saying something careless to a stranger. The woman I'd called my best friend for 6 years going completely still, and me being too slow to understand what my own heart had already known for longer than I wanted to admit. But we got here anyway. And some days, getting here anyway is the better story. Some days, the love that waited the longest is the love that stays. And if you have ever felt the same pull towards someone who was supposed to be only your friend, if you have ever laughed off something that mattered because it was easier than admitting how much it mattered, then you already know exactly how that checkout counter felt. You already know why 4 whispered words changed everything. I wish that wasn't a joke. They weren't. They never had been. I just needed long enough to stop pretending they were.